Now, South Africa's Koeberg nuclear power plant has been granted allowance to run one of its 2 units for another 20 years. This after the state-owned power utility Eskom applied for a 20-year extension to operate as part of efforts to end crippling power shortages. But what does this mean for the nation's green energy targets? Energy writer for the Business Day, Deneen Erasmus, joins us now with more insights. Deneen, a happy Wednesday. Thank you for your time.
Hi, happy to join you again.
Wonderful, Deneen. Maybe we can start off by speaking about nuclear energy. It's been in the spotlight quite a bit, actually. We have what's happened with Koeberg, but recently the Minister, Ramokgopa, has some commentary around building, a new nuclear power station. Where does nuclear actually fall into our energy mix or into our intended energy mix?
So obviously now with the extension that has been granted for Koeberg Unit 1 to run for an additional 20 years, we know that at least for the next 20 years, we will still have that as part of the energy mix. And it has deferred its decision on Unit 2, which does have a valid license to run until November 2025. So we'll hear before then whether the extension will be granted for Unit 2 as well. But I think if we just look at the draft integrated resources plan of 2023 that's being reviewed by the Department of Energy at the moment, that does in the long-term scenarios for SA's energy mix up to 2025, up to 2050, actually make quite a lot of provision for new nuclear to come online. And we do know that government certainly has ambition, both in the medium and in the longer term, to add more nuclear to South Africa's energy mix. Already last year, there was a request for information issued by the then Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, to just gauge what the interest will be in new nuclear builds in South Africa, what the cost will be, and the likely formats, whether that will be another large single station such as Koeberg, or whether we are going to look at sort of smaller modular reactors. And we have heard from Minister Ramokgopa, that's now been appointed as Minister of Electricity and Energy, that his department certainly does have plans to look at a nuclear build of about 2,500 megawatts, which would be larger than what we currently have with Koeberg. That's just over about 1,800 megawatts. The new integrated resources plan has not been finalized yet, so we don't really know for certain yet whether or not that will be sort of part of the policy approach. But certainly all indications are there that is the way the government wants to go, to increase nuclear in the power mix. The big question then will be whether or not they can get past Treasury with that, and whether South Africa will actually be able to afford such a large new nuclear build.
Now, speaking about affording, even with Koeberg and extending it for another 20 years, I think that 1 unit there, I imagine this won't be a cheap exercise, but I'm keen just to get the thoughts on that, the investments made into keeping that going, and also, Deneen, if it's worth it, because sometimes, we would want to keep an asset because it's up and going, but it might just be a bottomless pit in terms of costs.
So we don't have the final costs for this, but I think certainly from what we've heard from Dan Marukani, who's now been in the position of Eskom CEO for more than 100 days, that this is something that Eskom is looking at, both in terms of the current nuclear fleet, Koeberg, but also its plans to extend the life of some of the older coal power stations, where they have looked at those trade-offs and whether or not the costs of extending the lifetime of these stations would really be beneficial, instead of rather directing those funds towards putting up new renewable energy, for example. So I think we do have those assurances from Eskom that this definitely does have a cost benefit in terms of the total energy mix and total electricity costs for South Africa.
Another interesting one here is that South Africa actually does have anti-nuclear activist groups. I'm keen to get your thoughts on what their case might be against nuclear energy, specifically maybe in South Africa, but it might actually just be a global call.
Mm. So, in the public consultation process that took place for the National Nuclear Regulator to consider whether or not to grant the request by Eskom to have the license extended for Koeberg by 20 years, there were 8 public consultations in total, and there were the various safety concerns raised about the current state of Koeberg and also what the 20-year life extension might mean. For example, some anti-nuclear activists raised the issue of whether there was erosion to the containment buildings for the reactors that could lead to catastrophic consequences in the future. But in the explanation that the regulator gave and in the communication from Eskom following the granting of the license extension, there is assurance that that containment building does adhere to all the necessary safety standards. So that was one of the issues that was raised. I think, yes, internationally, there definitely is a very strong anti-nuclear lobby, and a lot of that also centers around the debate about whether we really see nuclear energy as a renewable and green form of energy, and that is mostly because of how we deal with the nuclear waste from nuclear reactors, in which is debatable whether or not we really do have a very long-term solution for that waste that would qualify this as a green type of energy or not.
I mean, another thing that's important, I guess, here, and I guess we've all watched Chernobyl, and that's bound to get many of us, really concerned about what could happen with nuclear. But what's interesting here, Adeline, is that even then, globally, it looks like the bodies that regulate, nuclear energy are really, really strict. It really is quite a difficult process for you to even get a power plant approved. I imagine even with Koeberg extension, we would have had to have consultations, even with, global bodies there. It is something that is closely watched, not something that is kind of left to governments and their own devices.
It is an extremely stringently internationally regulated industry, and Koeberg itself does have frequent inspections by the international nuclear agencies. So yes, there is very, very strict monitoring, regulation, and happening globally that all nuclear power, new and existing, has to adhere to.
Well, that's where we'll leave it today, but a pleasure speaking to you, and welcome back. That was Danina Erasmus, energy writer for the Business Day.